Greetings, stranger. We are just crossing the last bridge on the Roseguard Road before we arrive in Otari, so I thought it would be prudent to give you a heads up. Very soon, the buildings of this bustling coastal settlement will come into view. You'd be able to spy it already if it weren't for the fact that it was founded between two daunting cliffs that shield it from sight. It is quite a large town, with a population of about 1,200, mostly humans, but with all sorts of other hardy folk represented as well. In many ways, it is like Absalom writ small, and it also punches well above its weight in the sale of magical trinkets, baubles, and other curious oddities. Many of these have come from the influx of adventuring types who have started to descend on the surrounding area like raptors in recent years, so it is perhaps fitting that this river here is called the Osprey. Was its reputation perhaps why you decided to accompany me on my trip to Otari? Well, you're in good hands here. The locals never begrudge sword-swinging and spell-slinging travellers from abroad, so long as they pay their taps and contribute their fair share. If you will indulge me, I'll give you my tour of the town straight away, and you can get oriented before you commit yourself to a feathered bed. I shall begin with a brief exposition on the history of the town, which I am quite sure will prove more than engaging, because it is not your typical strategic location or natural trade spot. In fact, Otari was founded by adventurers. Afterwards, I will delve into the present locations available to you, and if you'll stick with me until the end, I will tell you a little bit about the haunted lighthouse that stands suspiciously far inland, scarcely a mile from here. So, let's begin at the beginning. Otari was founded by a trio of hunters called the Roseguard. By hunters, I mean professional monster slayers and treasure seekers, both of which here on Kortos are ancient and respected careers. The Absalom hunting lodges used to dot this island like so many stars in the sky, though their prominence and prestige has faded over the years as the indefatigable march of time has colonized more and more of these Starstone Isles and left it safer for longer periods. Still, approaching 500 years ago, in 4244, during a time of stoic peace for Kortos, as indicated by my tour of the Cairnlands, the Roseguard hunters were drawn to this almost uninhabited stretch of coastline on business. They originally numbered 4, but one was slain in the line of duty, and the survivors, having lost their taste for mortal peril, decided to retire from adventuring and fulfill their fallen comrade's last wish, to settle down in a humble fishing village. Even shoreline was too boisterous for them, so they instead invested much of their accumulated wealth on establishing a new outpost of civilization here, on the very spot where Otari Ilvashti, for that was his name, had died. They named the settlement after him, in his honor. The next 50 years passed in peace, but because it is a fearsome task to convince Absalomians to settle far away from their beloved metropolis, the fledgling hamlet never exceeded 100 people or so. The surviving Roseguard hunters held their tiny community together until the last member passed away, and then the settlement was quietly abandoned. 6 years later, it would be resettled not by adventurers or Absalomians, but by kobolds from the Stonescale tribe, whose leader had developed the habit of plundering passing ships during the island's many storms after running them aground. The reptilian raiders failed to foresee the consequences that hindering Absalom's precious mercantile trade routes would bring, and in 4310 the tribe was nearly wiped out by another group of hunters, this time led by one Maclani of House Menhemes. The survivors fled into the many caverns and tunnels that reticulate the shoreline, and the hunters followed in the founder's footsteps by initiating another drive for settlement. However, this time they recognized a more promising commercial opportunity than just fishing. They regarded the outskirts of the Immenwood and saw high-quality lumber for the taking. This proved to be far more successful, and ever since, Otari has been growing strong. Today, it is the largest town between Absalom and Diabel, and thus represents an important checkpoint for weary, overland travellers. Aha, and here is our first evidence of this regenerated lumber town. This mysterious marvel of engineering has been encroaching on us for some time, but now I can reveal it to be the Otari Flume, a brilliant solution to the obvious problem posed by needing to transport heavy logs hundreds of yards towards the coast. Cut timber is loaded into the flume by the woodsmen at their logging camp in the Immenwood. The logs can then be conveyed through a combination of mechanics, water and gravity, all the way to the mill for processing. Of course, the Osprey River is critically important to this, because it provides both the water for the flume and, indirectly, the power for its operation and the mills. It was in fact Maclani Menhemes herself who devised this system, and it made her, Otari, and House Menhemes very wealthy. It also made House Menhemes a staunch opponent of the Kortos Consortium, which is a trade cartel intent on controlling the flow of all goods and materials on the island. Before the flume's completion, the Consortium had a stranglehold over the Starstone Isle's entire lumber network, but Otari's regeneration broke it. Ever since, the organization has sought to sabotage, or better yet, seize, the local industry, but so far they have failed. I understand their most recent efforts came about 3 years ago, when some hired thugs let the situation spiral completely out of control and nearly brought destruction onto the entire town. The Consortium detests the direct confrontations of the sort that emerged from the affair, and it has been rather subdued ever since. Still, do not think for a moment that the conflict is over. As we approach the final bridge, you can see directly ahead of us the Otari Mill at the flume's termination. Locals have dubbed it the Giant's Wheel, although that name technically refers only and quite suitably to the 30-foot diameter water wheel that generates the necessary torque for everything. I cannot imagine the amount of energy that thing has put out since its completion, but it has been more than enough to power the blades of the mill and the conveyor belts of the flume day and night. Of course, such a valuable construction cannot be left undefended, something House Menhemes understands well. So I do not think it is a coincidence that they have long had on their payroll a former gladiator of the Aurorium called Claude Hengus as the mill's foreman. Before he pursued a career in the timber industry, the half-orc fighter earned the nickname the Lumberjacker on account of the wild swings he would take with his paired hatchets in the arena. Before you ask, no, he doesn't seem to recognize the humor in his present role. Although he is a respected warrior, he spends most of his time stopping Otari's youths from taking wild rides on the flume, which is a popular game played by children of all ages here. That cross-shaped home next to the mill is Menhemes Manor, owned by the current head of the Otari Menhemes family, Lord Ophes. He also happens to be the long-time mayor of Otari, a locally elected position, but one that has been held by a member of the family ever since the town's rejuvenation. This is not as corrupt as you might think. The family is well respected here, and Mayor Ophes does his best to keep politics and business separate, as impossible as that might seem. If you accompanied me on my tour of Westgate, then you may recall that this manor is actually quite small compared to the true Menhemes Manor that is located there. Westgate's manor is overseen by the head of the house, the Scion Lord, and represents the bulk of the family's actual power. Nevertheless, do not underestimate the influence of the Otari branch of the family, for they control the lumber trade here and bring great wealth and prestige to a house that is otherwise quite inconsequential beyond the district. The conservative culture of Westgate has surely also helped to secure the mayoral position here for so long. The locals might not consider themselves to be city folk, but they have a deep respect for their long-standing traditions and understand that, so long as nothing changes, there is no reason to reject the stewardship of their founding house. And here we are, at last. This is Otari before us, occupying its valley on both sides of the Osprey River to the inner sea. You can immediately see that this is no normal town, what with the domed temple there and the disproportionate number of ships in the small harbour. Its history has given it plenty of time to overflow onto the overlooking cliffs as well, the mill and the flume being just the first examples, and doubtless it will continue to flourish in the years to come. We find ourselves at a crossroads. We could continue following Roseguard Road all the way down into the town, but I think it would be better instead to circle its edge from on high. This gives a commanding view, and I can more easily point out the relevant establishments. Also, look how busy it is down there. Otari is the sort of place that bursts at its seams, and I suspect the camel and carriage approach will prove just a bit too ambitious for an extended tour. So let's make our way towards the graveyard on the west cliff, and as we do, I will indicate where to buy your gear, where to stay the night, and where to seek adventuring contracts. The first important building is that large warehouse immediately on your left as you enter town. It is called Gallentine Deliveries, and it serves as the post office, stables, and overland trade hub for Otari. It is run by Aloria Gallentine, a lifelong ranger of the Immenwood. There is little on Kortos that she has not seen in her time, and even less that can surprise her, so she is the perfect postmaster for an adventuring town. People are always looking to make or take deliveries from the city at the center of the world, and Aloria is often too busy to handle them herself, so this is a good place to try your luck if you want to be paid to see more of Kortos. Sensibly located adjacent to the delivery outpost on Drake Street is the local garrison's headquarters. I must say, it is probably for the best that we are spectating it from a distance, not just because the building itself is quite squat and ugly to behold up close, but because the captain of the guard is a short-tempered man called Lardus Longsaddle. He moved here some 15 years ago after a career in one of Absalom's own guard forces, and I think he has come to resent the garrison he now leads. You see, unlike the various guard forces of his home city, the garrison here also doubles as the firefighting service to Otari, and triples as its barristers. These latter professions do not really have much to do with police work, and poor Longsaddle is constantly called upon to deal with problems outside his skill set. To cap everything else off, he was only asked to lead the garrison after its predecessor, a dwarf called Master Hainley, who was very fond of mead, lost a drunken bet regarding how long he could hold his breath underwater with tragic consequences. Still, the rank-and-file guardsmen are almost all locals who are keen to defend their home, and their green and white uniforms are a welcome sight for travellers heading towards the town. That small tower-like building to the west of the delivery depot belongs to one of Otari's most recent and most eccentric arrivals, a title that many people here work hard to claim for themselves. It is called Wrin's Wonders, and it only opened about 6 years ago, when the elf constructed it to avoid sharp angles in favour of gentle curves. Wrin Savinxi herself hails from Kionin, the elves' northern enclave, but she also embraces her tiefling heritage. She is something of a dreamer, and reveres the astrological zodiac called the Cosmic Caravan. The inside of her domed home is painted to resemble the night sky, so that she can fall asleep underneath it even if the outside is overcast or concealed. Indeed, the entire roof canvas can be pulled back to expose the inside to the sun or to the stars, for above all else, Wrin values the freedom of space that the outside world can offer her. Then there are a number of small buildings occupying the centre blocks of Otari that may prove useful to you adventuring folks. The first is Blades for Glades, the local smithy. Despite the establishment's name, the smiths there generally specialise in tools, and blades for fishing or lumber, not arms fit for battle. On the other hand, a blade is a blade, and you will not struggle to find someone willing to forge you one, provided that it does not need to be enchanted or bejewelled fit for a king. A little deeper into Otari, and you will find that building there, Odd Stories. This is a short, stone tower that is run by the wizard Morlabint, and indeed you will find that he sells his spellcasting services to those in need. But it is not his chief passion. Morlabint is a scholar first and a wizard second, and his shop is full of fiction books and dusty academic works on esoteric subjects rather than spellbooks for learned mages. I am quite pleased to be able to tell you that I recently persuaded him to stock some copies of the Encyclopaedia Galarianensis on the ground floor, although he insisted that he be able to sell them using the tome's subtitle, The Hitchhiker's Guide to Galarian. That should tell you the kind of fellow that Morlabint is at heart, and you should definitely take the time to chat with him, if you can. Those buildings in the middle of town belong to the Farmers Guild, which oversees the region's numerous homesteads and working fields. When Otari was founded, the whole area was little more than untamed wilderness, but the soil is quite fertile, and that has since invited economy from locals who prefer tilled earth and green thumbs. It is not an especially busy area most of the time. After all, the farm work is done miles from Otari proper, but the guild administrators work hard to ensure that pens for livestock and comfortable rooms for visiting farmers are always available. If you have a background in agriculture, I understand that the guild head, Jarla Highstepper, is always looking for more goods inspectors. Finally, in those middle blocks, we have the temple tavern called Crow's Casks. Taverns close to ports are always large and bustling establishments, and this one is no exception. Moreover, if it serves as a shrine to a deity, it is almost always either to Besmara, the pirate queen, or to the drunken god Caden Kalian. In this case, it is the latter, although the tavern's proprietor, a Tengu alchemist called Magaloy, is rumoured to have had quite an exciting earlier career sailing the high seas under the Black Flag. These days, the biggest danger you face entering Crow's Casks is actually to your throat, which is just as likely to be assaulted by some vile alchemical mishap as it is to be cleansed with a cooling mug of beer. I think the problem has become so infamous that the alchemist has actually begun to hire taste testers full-time, which initially drew enormous enthusiasm from foreign sailors, until they too learned what the locals had long come to understand. On the other hand, that does mean that you probably have an excellent chance of being hired by her. Just don't say I didn't warn you when some bizarre mutagenic side effect turns your hair white or gives you cat eyes or something. Now, as we begin our way along the western cliff, we can see two large estates side by side directly below us. The first is Inkleholtz Manor, run by the shrewd businesswoman Alimora. Despite the fact that her lumber company, Whistledown Cutters, has to rent operation of the log flume from her biggest competitor, she has managed to turn it into the most profitable business in town. Furthermore, Alimora has directed and funded the creation of many well-regarded schools in Otari, which has endeared her to most of the parents here who might otherwise be tempted by an Absalomian education. I think she has the best chance of unseating House Menhemes from the mayor's position in the near future, though for now Alimora seems not to mind growing her business quietly and staying out of politics. Her neighbour is Rab Chertel, the current owner of that second manor. Once I tell you that Mr. Chertel is the owner of the third and final lumber company in town, Chertel Timber, then you should conclude, quite rightly, that the business has been a boon for the company chiefs as well as the town as a whole. On the other hand, Chertel Timber has not been performing as well as its competitors recently, a state of affairs for which Chertel blames the mayor and Alimora alike. They do have the most to gain from sabotaging the competition after all, yet in my experience the whole story is never quite as straightforward as it initially seems, and thus far, Mr. Chertel has failed to produce any evidence to support his accusations. By now, you have probably spotted that ruined site adjacent to the two manors. Well, those are the remnants of the Thirsty Alpaca, which until its collapse a few years ago used to be the most popular tavern in town. Nobody is certain precisely what happened. One night, carousers and the tavern keeper were both subject to creaks and groans, and then the whole building spontaneously collapsed as if suddenly unsupported. The proprietor's body was never recovered, and several others were confirmed to have been killed by falling debris. An investigation was ordered, but then indefinitely suspended after people began to notice eerie glows, dancing lights, and disturbing laughter from the site, leading most people to conclude that it was haunted. Given that Crow's Cask had recently opened, the townsfolk decided it would be better to migrate there than to risk misfortune by disturbing some eldritch horror. It has thus been neglected ever since, desperate for someone to investigate. Now, let us turn our attention away from the valley below us for a moment to regard this peculiar stone circle. A cursory glance is all that is required to discern that this is no natural formation, although the central pond is. This is the aptly named Stone Ring Pond, and it serves as a shrine to Gozray, the dualistic deity of storms and other calamitous coastal weathers. As a nature deity, it is considered improper to keep a shrine in Otari itself, or so many of the wandering Gozrayn druids who frequent this place will tell you. While there is some truth to this, it is simply a veil disguising the true reason. One of their number killed half a dozen innocent townsfolk during an uncontrolled rampage as a werewolf some years ago, and the harm inflicted to the community is not easily forgotten. A very optimistic and relentlessly good-natured gnome druid called Wrin has spent much of her life trying to repair the damage that terrible night caused, and she has found some success, especially with the local woodsmen who respect the protection she can offer them. However, the werewolf's ultimate fate was unclear for quite some time, because he was unceremoniously shoved off this cliff, and so many locals doubted whether justice had been truly served. Now, by casting our gaze to the dockside buildings in the valley below, we first mark the penultimate tavern in Otari. It is that building there, called the Rowdy Rockfish. The name is misleading because it is actually the humblest and quietest of the town's bars. It is run by the Venkavale family, who prefer cozy fireside sea tales to drunken brawls and boisterous cries. The family has suffered in recent years, and the culture of Otari looks after its own, so the locals know to be respectful of their privacy, and visit the Rockfish only when they have an appropriately calm evening in mind. That wide bridge close to the Rockfish has our final tavern on it. It is actually a full inn called Crook's Nook, and unlike its neighbour, its name is most fitting. Run by the well-known smuggler Menhemes, the Nook is home to a local thieves guild who have a penchant for targeting outsiders with con games and légère de main. Captain Longsaddle has made it more or less clear that the garrison will turn a blind eye to her activities so long as they do not impact locals, which of course just makes visitors like you and I all the more appealing to her thieves' fingers. I would therefore advise against staying at the Nook if possible, and to seek alternative lodgings, though you absolutely must try their seafood stews if you have some spare change. The lobster is fiendishly good. The Nook overlooks the Otari Market on the other side of the bridge. It is a daily event that primarily facilitates trade between locals and the produce of the Farmers Guild, but it is nevertheless worth your time if you enjoy trinket shopping. You never know what may turn up at a farmer's market after all. That said, a word of caution. Under no circumstances reveal yourself to be associated in any way with Gozray to the marketmaster, Kileno Lathanar. His wife was one of the victims of the werewolf attack some 30 years ago, and he has never forgiven the Gozran Ecclestials for their part in permitting it. I mean it, mention Gozray at the marketplace at your own risk. On the south side of the market square, and at the base of the large pier, lies the Otari Fishery, which operates as a business headquarters by day, but a bar and gaming lounge by night. It is run by Tamali Tandervale, whose respect for adventurers stems from her time as a sailor in the Grey Corsairs, the scourge of seaborne slavers everywhere. She bears a peg leg from her last engagement with them, and soon after retired to become the warden of Otari's Fishery. While her life is much less perilous these days, she still adores the telling of tall tales, as well as a whole host of card and dice games befitting any good sea dog. Thus, she will often send for an adventuring party as soon as she detects a whiff of trouble, and is a stable source of employment for them. In this way, I think she has contributed far more to Otari's economy than most people realize. Now, the penultimate stop in our tour today is before us, slowly creeping over the hill, year by year. Welcome to the Otari Graveyard, the final resting place of many locals and adventurers whose souls have departed this mortal space for Pharasma's boneyard. About 2 years ago, a terrible spell befell this place, and the restless dead shambled forth from their graves, literally falling onto the town below. Still, it normally enjoys a quiet, if heavy, atmosphere. The graveyard is tended by the acolytes of Sarenrae, who can access it directly from their temple below by way of a long, spiral staircase that snakes its way up the cliffside. I think many of the ecclesials prefer to enter the long way around, though. Burial here is far less common than it used to be, with more and more wills stipulating either cremation or burial at sea, both of which are seen as worthy alternatives by the locals. Given recent history, I can certainly understand why. Finally, let's admire the Dawnflower Library below us. It is by far the largest building in Otari, because it serves as a temple to more than just the goddess of healing. Nested underneath its 3 sea blue domes are shrines to almost every deity aligned with the Dawnflower's ideals, including Caden Kalian, Erastiel, and Iomade. Per its name, the temple also functions as an impressive library for Otari, complementing the outlandish and bizarre writings in odd stories with more religious, scholarly, and historical textbooks. The head priestess is presently a halfling by the name of Vandy Banderdash, who has long welcomed all newcomers to the town with open arms. If you find yourself wounded after a particularly fearsome battle with the stone-scale kobolds or harpies or some devilish sea serpent, you should make your way here to seek healing services. That more or less concludes everything there is to see in Otari. But I know I promised you something a little more mysterious, didn't I? Very well. Let us now turn about face to spy the ruins over yonder. Yes, it is indeed a lighthouse, though quite far from the shore. It lurks in the middle of a bog called the Fog Fen, and it actually predates Otari by some years. Its construction was a mystery for a long while, but all I should tell you for now is that it was not undertaken with beneficence in mind. Even its name, Gauntlight Keep, betrays a certain spectral fear. It is constantly being overrun with monsters and ghosts and demons and other things that go bump in the night. It is a sure way to gain adventuring experience, but be careful not to delve too deep. You never know what you might find, or disturb. But you must be tired. Come, let us conclude our tour here. So, that is Otari, the setting for many brave heroes' first foray into fortune and folly alike. You are welcome to stay as long as you like, of course, though I myself will need to be departing on the morrow to continue my journey along the coast. I am making my way to Diabel, a notorious smuggler's port, also known as the back door to Absalom. The journey is nowhere near as storied as the one between here and the city at the center of the world, but it still needs to be undertaken following a good night's rest. I may tell a tale or two in the Rowdy Rockfish as the moon rises tonight, but you should only attend that if you do not mind losing sleep to intruding thoughts. Well, until then.